Madam President, it's really a very special honor for me to welcome President Dilma Rousseff to Davos for the first time. And we welcome you not only because you are the head of the seventh largest economy in the world, you are heading this year the BRICS, your grouping, but you are so well incorporating into your action and into your politics this notion of social inclusiveness, which we have identified as the world's most important risk if it is not addressed appropriately. And you, Madam President, I think you stand out because in the mandate of your presidency, in your first mandate, you have paid particularly attention to this notion of social inclusion. I just would like to mention the various social development programs which you have launched. I'm not going into the details, but you yourself, you have also your lifelong struggle and leadership for Brazil's democracy are also highly recognized around the world. You, in some way, epitomize the premise that true leadership demands and shows solidarity. As you have so well expressed, economic expectations cannot be based on creating more inequality, on macroeconomic imbalances, nor on external vulnerabilities. Social inclusion is one of the most important drivers of economic growth at the end. I just want to mention some of your achievements. One has been the lifting of 36 million people out from extreme poverty and integrating 40 million people into the middle class. One other thing which is very close to our hearts and particularly to the World Economic Forum, you have been a true leader in gender parity matters and have moved away from a short-term focus and developed policies for long-term priorities. Madam President, we welcome you very cordially in the snow of Davos. And of course, we are very anxious to hear from you in a very decisive year for Brazil, to hear about your policies. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the President of Brazil.
Boa tarde.
Good afternoon, Mr. Klaus Schwab, founding president of the World Economic Forum, heads of state and heads of government, cabinet ministers, members of my delegation, ladies and gentlemen, representing the business and financial communities, ladies and gentlemen, journalists, photographers, and cameramen, ladies and gentlemen at large. More than 5 years have gone by since the onset of the global financial crisis, the deepest and most complex crisis since 1929. Government leaders, members of the business community and workers found themselves before the difficult challenge of avoiding the worst, while engaging in an effort to rebuild the path towards prosperity, towards resumption of production activity, investments, and particularly job opportunities. All economies had to face up to the task of recovering business confidence, the kind of confidence that is really key and essential for good economic performance. In order to definitely exit the crisis, one is required to adopt an approach that will attach priority not only to the short term. The short term is very important, but it is just natural that in a crisis environment that is contaminated by its adverse effects, many evaluations or reviews ultimately focus solely on the short-term time dimension. It is, however, absolutely essential to bear in mind the medium and long-term time horizons in our reviews in order to support diagnosis and actions that are required to ensure growth of the different economies. From that perspective, even if it is true that developed economies show clear-cut signs of recovery, the fact remains that emerging economies will still continually perform a strategic role. We are, after all, talking about those countries that have the biggest investment opportunities and prospects for expanding consumption. We, the emerging countries, are countries that require and demand a diversified logistics infrastructure, social and urban infrastructure, as well as energy, oil, gas infrastructure, as well as ores, as well as industrial and agricultural investments. We are societies currently undergoing a strong social mobility process, societies where new and dynamic domestic markets are being established. Domestic markets that are made up by hundreds of millions, sometimes even billions of consumers. Therefore, the view or notion according to which, following the crisis, emerging economies will allegedly be less dynamic is an over-hasty theory. They will be more dynamic precisely because that's where huge opportunities lie, especially considering that the current investment and trade flows and high employment rates, as well as the current outlook for business opportunities available in these economies, point precisely to a different direction, and they point towards the direction of opportunities currently available. The fact is that since the developed economies have been the hardest hit by the crisis, once they come out of the crisis, they will certainly create a more favorable global environment for everyone. A more favorable global economic environment. Brazil, in turn, has been going through a deep social transformation in the past few years. By means of a speedy social mobility process, Brazil is becoming a mostly middle-class nation. Let me just share a few figures with you that reflect or illustrate that fact. 36 million men and women who have been taken out of extreme poverty in the recent past, plus the 42 million Brazilians who have been uplifted and mainstreamed into the middle class, which went from 37% of the population up to 55% of the Brazilian population between 2003 and 2012 alone. To date, the average mean per capita income of Brazilian families grew 78% in the same period. In the past 3 years, we have created 4,500,000 new job posts. We have created a large domestic mass consumer market. We are currently one of the world's largest markets for automobiles, computers, mobile phones, refrigerators, pharmaceuticals, and cosmetics. However, only 45% of Brazilian households currently have a computer. 55% of Brazilian households have an automatic washing machine. 17% have a freezer, and 8% have a flat-screen TV set, which clearly shows the size of the demand yet to be met in Brazil and the related business opportunities. We have developed a huge contingent of citizens who now enjoy better standards of living and more access to information, as well as a greater awareness of their rights. Citizens who now have new hopes, new wishes, and new demands. Some of these new Brazilian citizens were in the recent June demonstrations of last year out in the streets. And the last year June demonstrations are an inseparable part of our process of building democracy and fostering social change. My administration did not crack down on those demonstrators. Much on the contrary, we heard and we understood the voices of the streets. The demonstrators did not ask for a return to the past or the life of the past. Rather, they asked for progress towards a future of more rights, more participation, and more social gains. We know all too well that democracy breeds a desire for more democracy. Social inclusion leads to an expectation for more social inclusion. Quality of life arouses a yearning for more quality of life, a yearning for more and for better services. It is our view that all of the achievements attained thus far will always be nothing but just a beginning. We must change this outstanding energy out there, available and demonstrated by the Brazilian people out in the streets, into accomplishments that will benefit everyone. This new emerging Brazil, even if somewhat unequal, although certainly less unequal, is being built without giving up any of our commitments towards sound economic or macroeconomic foundations. Inflation control and balanced government accounts are key sine qua non requirements in order to ensure the much-needed stability as the solid foundation for economic expansion and social progress. Inflation in Brazil remains under control, and since 1999, Brazil has pursued the inflation targeting regime. In the past few years, we have pursued the very center of the target, and year after year we have worked to attain this objective. The results achieved thus far are very much within the range acceptable under this monetary regime. May I underscore that we have purposefully sought convergence towards the center of the inflation target. The experience we had with extremely high inflation rates back in the 1980s and 90s taught us a lesson on the destructive power of lack of price control over income, wages, business profits, and obviously enough on the overall economic variables. Currency stability is currently a central value for us Brazilians as a nation. May I emphasize that we do not compromise with inflation. Fiscal responsibility, in turn, is a founding principle of our economic and social development vision. In Brazil, federal government current accounts are under control, and there has been a qualitative improvement in government accounts in the past few years. We have successfully attained a sharp reduction in the net public sector debt, which fell from 41 or 42.1% in 2009 at the very beginning of the crisis, down to 34% of the GDP in 2013. Even the gross debt has dropped in the same period, going from 60.9% down to 58.5% of the GDP. My administration will soon set the primary surplus target for this year, and we will do so very much in line with the current trend to reduce public indebtedness. It is my belief that Brazil posts one of the lowest government indebtedness levels in the world. Now, as we look towards the future, two other initiatives emerge as strategic. The first such initiative is about enhancing the control over subnational government accounts and strengthening the principle of fiscal stability in order to ensure greater effectiveness and transparency to the subnational government's task of developing and fostering a primary surplus. And that, of course, includes the federal administration plus the state and municipal governments. The second key initiative is about repositioning state-owned banks so as to expand credit availability for investment purposes, which is currently possible given the increased involvement of private financing, the capital markets, and new financial tools. In Brazil, we have a sound financial system with high levels of capital, liquidity, and provisioning, which has helped ensure a sustainable expansion of credit availability in the course of the past few years. The system that is currently in place is also an efficient one and includes a harmonious role for private institutions, private banks, both national and foreign private banks. These institutions have performed an important role in Brazil in the past few years, especially the public financial system during the periods of turbulence in international financial markets. With the resumption of normal conditions in global markets, the government's strategic guidance is that these public institutions should go back to their natural roles and agendas as part of their original mandate. The global financial crisis has now taken on new contours as we see the tapering or withdrawal of monetary incentives by developed countries. Now, while recognizing that this move reflects a trend towards recovery of the world's economy and trade, there remain lingering challenges that do breed volatility in the financial markets. Our international reserves currently stand at about $376 billion and as such provide a safe cushion to absorb that volatility. Furthermore, the swap program designed by the Brazilian Central Bank has succeeded in providing an element of credibility and stability to our foreign exchange market. Brazil's first line of defense is our floating foreign exchange policy. In parallel, the broad flow of foreign direct investment in 2013 coming to $64 billion, FDI flows that remain clearly directed to Brazil further strengthens our resiliency to the changing financial and monetary conditions. From day one in my administration, we have been keenly aware of the need to evolve towards a new stage. We have reiterated our commitment towards institutional quality, especially as regards respect towards existing contracts, and our commitment towards a stable economic environment that will prove attractive to investors. It is our objective to structurally improve the Brazilian economy, thus making it increasingly competitive. To that end, it is critical that we engage in an increasingly better management of government funds by reforming the state apparatus and by cutting down on red tape and bureaucracy. Accordingly, measures aimed at lowering bureaucratic requirements are key in order to boost Brazilian productivity. Let me just refer to one example, the so-called streamlined or simple business web portal to be put in place this year with the purpose of shortening the time required to open a business in Brazil to no more than 5 days. Above all, we must and we are clearly determined to foster a strong increase in investments in infrastructure, education, and innovation. By so doing, we will increase the investment rate vis-à-vis the Brazilian GDP, which is absolutely key to uphold and sustain long-term growth. That is ultimately the meaning or the purpose of our infrastructure expansion program, whose purpose is ultimately about overcoming the bottlenecks that have resulted from decades of under-investment and made worse by the strong increase in demand in the past few years. Working in partnership with the private sector, we have in place a concessions program focusing on integrated logistics infrastructure, energy infrastructure, plus social and urban infrastructure, all of which involves hundreds of billions of dollars. The ultimate objective of the program is to, of course, add funds while boosting efficiency and enhancing management of the services associated to those public works. The private sector consortia that have taken part in the ongoing concessions and bidding processes are made up by large Brazilian and foreign corporations. We have thus far carried out 5 highway auctions, thereby transferring more than 4,000 kilometers onto private sector hands for management purposes. We have also established concessions agreements for 6 airports granted to consortia led by large international operators. And altogether, in the course of the life cycle of these agreements, a sum of $20 billion will be attained, ultimately speaking. We have also adopted a new regulatory framework for the port system, therefore enabling expansion of private sector involvement in the provision of services based on efficiency criteria and increased cargo throughput and volume. Thus far, 8 privately run ports have been authorized, which involves investments of more than $1.5 billion. In 2014, we will further authorize new privately run ports terminals, and we will start the leasing arrangements for public ports. A new model for highway concessions is currently underway. Brazil is a country that is as vast as a continent, and therefore we need a proper railway system, especially for grain and ore outflow, as well as for container transport. In 2014, we will carry out the very first such auction for one stretch in the Brazilian Midwest. The remaining stretches or sections will be further implemented as of this year, and we will re-establish the contours of certain projects in a spirit of dialogue with investors. One of the major challenges facing Brazil is about building a modern railway network that is in line with Brazil's continental size. 3 oil and gas bidding rounds have been conducted in the past year. The milestone event in this area was the auction of the huge Libra oil field, which was won by a consortium of companies between the Brazilian oil company Petrobras and 4 large oil companies that bring together both technical capabilities and financial resources. The Libra oil field is estimated to have reserves between 8 to 12 billions of barrels of oil. Its commercial development is expected to mobilize direct investments of about $180 billion in the next 35 years. Its multiplier effect will certainly have a positive impact on the entire oil and gas production chain. By commercially developing the other oil fields that have a similar potential as compared to the Libra oil field, Brazil will certainly become a substantial exporter of oil. In the electric energy arena, we have thus far carried out about 7 auctions, which have added more than 9,000 megawatts to the installed capacity in the generation segment. We have always attached priority to renewable sources of energy in our energy mix. Brazil's energy mix is, by the way, one of the world's cleanest energy mix. In the transmission segment, about 10 auctions have been carried out, thus adding more than 20,000 kilometers to the country's transmission grid. One of our main objectives is about energy security. The businessmen and women in the audience are all too aware of the importance of planning in advance for system expansion, and they also know that the certainty of a regular supply is absolutely key to inform one's investment decision. The urban agenda is very much at the center of our concerns. Brazilian cities require investments in public transport, sanitation, and housing, especially considering that this year marks the World Football Cup and the Olympics in 2016. Of course, urban infrastructure is absolutely key as we move on and towards these international events. We have invested $62 billion in metros or subways, light vehicles on trains, and monorails by means of public-private partnerships. We're talking about 600 kilometers of rail systems and solutions to overcome my country's biggest urban problem. In other words, safe and rapid mass transport. Yet another extremely important challenge for us is about sanitation. And that is important not only to ensure higher standards of living, but also an important challenge as regards the funds required, especially for building sewage and water treatment systems. We are currently investing $36 billion to expand the basic sanitation services. $36 billion currently being invested in sanitation. As you know, Brazil is home to the world's largest freshwater reserve. But we also have extremely dry regions in Brazil, as is the case of portions in northeastern Brazil. Now, in order to expand the water supply, we are currently investing $14 billion in dams, water mains and canals, as well as water supply systems and cisterns and wells. Hundreds and thousands of these solutions are being put in place. As I wrap up my comments on this point, may I say a few words about a program of which I am very proud as implemented in Brazil. I'm talking about the My House, My Life program, our low-income housing program. Since 2011, we have contracted for the building of 2,240,000 housing units, of which 1.5 million have already been delivered. Through this program, we have ensured access to housing to the poorest segments of the population by combining public funds and financing in a total of $87 billion. As such, we have established something that is extremely important. I'm talking about a financial equation which, considering the population's income, has enabled the program without nevertheless creating any risk to the real estate industry. Yet another infrastructure challenge is about the task of extending our high-performance, high-capacity broadband network throughout the Brazilian territory. Such a network will also serve as the foundation for the educational policy we have put in place, which attaches priority to inclusion and quality. Education will increasingly perform a twofold function in Brazil. On the one hand, it will shape a democratic nation, thus ensuring perennial eradication of stark destitution and poverty in Brazil. It will also ensure that Brazil will not experience any setback in terms of social economic equality. Furthermore, on the other hand, it will anchor our growth on technology and innovation, thus shaping the knowledge economy. So we're talking about a twofold role of education, which are absolutely key in Brazil. It is our objective to develop a generation of young experts, researchers, and scientists. We are currently engaged in fostering the largest expansion of the federal, higher, and technological education network in our history. For that reason, we have democratized access to government-run universities. We have also broadened our school grants or scholarship programs, as well as funds made available for students to have access to private sector universities, thus benefiting no less than 2,400,000 young people from low-income families who would otherwise not have a way to make it to private universities. We have also put in place a nationwide examination for admission to higher education by putting in place a fair, efficient and merit-based model. Our Science Without Borders program is currently providing young people in Brazil with the opportunity of studying in the world's best universities. The only selection criteria is to have a good score in Brazil's nationwide competitive examination, which is, by the way, a sine qua non condition for students to qualify and be eligible to any of our programs. As part of the Science Without Borders programs, we're talking about 101,000 scholarships for universities from 39 different countries in the fields of engineering sciences, exact sciences, and technology. In a partnership with the private sector and working with all business federations, we have deployed a broad-ranging technical education program. And just to give you an idea, in a little less than 2 years, we have gone beyond the threshold of 5 million enrollments in these technical education programs. In conclusion, I would like to say to you that Brazil's historic decision to allocate no less than 75% of the oil revenues royalties in both the pre- and post-salt layer oil deposits, plus 50% of the social fund of the pre-salt layer revenues for the education sector will allow us to do even more. We will change the oil industry's finite wealth into a perennial asset available to our population. In other words, education. The alchemy of changing oil into knowledge or education will certainly benefit our production infrastructure. Properly trained and developed workers will be able to create more productivity in the economy and therefore will be in a position to apply knowledge and innovation in their practice. And that, of course, will certainly lead to more productivity. Furthermore, our Innova Empresa, or Business Innovation Program, has mobilized $14 billion in the form of government funds allocated for research and development. Brazilian agriculture is a success story reflecting a positive partnership between the private sector and the public sector in terms of engaging in innovation and absorbing scientific and technological knowledge. It was precisely thanks to the technology developed by Embrapa, Brazil's agricultural research organization, and the technology developed by Brazilian agribusiness, that we were able to boost our grain production by 221% in the past 2 decades. And we did so by expanding the planted acreage or area by only 41%. So we're talking about a growth level of no less than 180% in agricultural yield or productivity, which has allowed Brazil to enjoy record-level grain harvests. In the 2014 harvest, we are expected to harvest more than 195 million tons of grains, while reducing deforestation and disseminating sustainable cropping practices. During the Copenhagen Climate Conference, we voluntarily undertook to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 36% at the minimum. We then broke a taboo, and we showed clearly that yes, it is possible to produce in a sustainable fashion and also produce in an equally efficient fashion. May I, in conclusion, voice the following remark. The time has arrived for us to overcome defensive stances and recognize the role of world trade in economic recovery. The historic global agreement reached at the World Trade Organization renews hope for a balanced completion of the Doha round. Brazil is ready, and Brazil is also committed to bi-regional Mercosur-European Union negotiations with a view to a trade agreement. May I again stress that a new economic growth cycle or a new world economic growth cycle is currently under gestation. As the crisis recedes, we will certainly see emerging countries attract greater attention. With a long-term strategy focused on fostering investments, on education and on increased productivity, we hope to come out of the current international crisis even better off. Brazil is currently one of the broadest frontiers of business opportunities in the world. Our success in the next few years will be associated to partnership arrangements established with investors from Brazil and from throughout the world. We have always welcomed foreign investments. My administration has put in place measures to further facilitate those relations. Features of the current state of affairs or the recent state of affairs should not overshadow that fact. As I said before, Brazil needs and certainly wants to engage in a partnership with both Brazilian and foreign private investment stakeholders. Brazil would like to hereby invite you all to join us in the effort. And in conclusion, may I take the opportunity to invite you all to join us in the upcoming World FIFA Football Cup, the Cup of all cups, to be hosted in Brazil next June. May I also use the opportunity to invite you all to please join us in the upcoming 2016 Olympics in Rio. Brazil is the country of football. Yes, we all love football, and I'm certain that together with other countries in the world, I would not be bold enough to say with all other countries in the world, but may I say with the vast majority of other countries in the world, we all enjoy football and have it as one of the most important forms of asserting values such as peace. And also, it is a form of tackling prejudice, all forms of prejudice. May I also say that we are poised and ready for the upcoming World Cup. The investments I refer to are also investments aimed at the upcoming World Football Cup. But above all, they are investments that have stemmed from Brazil's domestic needs. May I also say that we have our arms open, wide open, to welcome visitors from all over the world. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you, Madam President. I think you have given us back confidence into the development of the emerging countries. This was one of the big issues, and of course, you have described to us the necessary policies to justify this optimism. Macroeconomic stability and discipline, the necessary reforms. Now I could go on also your concessions scheme, which is a demonstration of the importance you are giving to public-private cooperation. Unfortunately, we have run out of time for discussion, but I know you, Madam President, you have other opportunities this afternoon to interact with the audience. At the end, I can only say we wish you a great year with all what's happening, and of course, particularly with the World Cup. And even if I'm not Brazilian, I have to say we wish you and your team, and if I say your team, I mean also your governmental team, which is here, to score as many goals as possible. Thank you.